Hey everybody, it's Logan Albright here, and today I'm going to do a review of two books for you to kind of give you a little bit of a dose of optimism on this drizzly autumn evening. Here we go. All right, so today I want to talk about a fellow named Steven Pinker, and he's a professor at Harvard University. He specializes in linguistics, social sciences, cognitive sciences, all kinds of things like that. I first became aware of him because I was interested in linguistics, and he wrote some very good books on that subject. But he's now branched out, and he's done a book on writing styles, and he's done books on lots of different things about how the human mind works and about our society in general. And I think he's a great, really clear thinker. It's rare in these days. You have a public intellectual who's not a demagogue, not an ideologue. He just is a very clear thinker, and he's got a lot of great lectures on YouTube. You should check him out. He's someone who talks common sense, where I feel like most people are not talking common sense. And I have two books here by him that I want to talk about because I think they're really important books. The first one is called The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined. And the other one is called Enlightenment Now, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. And these are both great books, and they're along a similar theme. Basically, there's so many people all over the internet, especially on the internet, also in person, but I see it every day when I look at my Facebook feed, when I look at YouTube comments, when I look at Twitter, which I try not to do at all because Twitter is the devil. There's so many people who are just convinced that the world is coming to an end, that things are worse than they've ever been, that our democracy is collapsing, that war is worse than it's ever been, that school shootings are worse than they've ever been. Everything's terrible. If only we could go back to the good old days, things would be so much better. And now Steven Pinker, in his very rigorous scientific fashion, has gone through the evidence, and he has sifted through mountains and mountains of data and presented it in these 800-page books for our enjoyment. But he's also a really entertaining writer, so don't let that get you down. And he's shown that actually we're living in arguably the best time in human history. Things are better than they've ever been for the most part, and we should stop being so gloomy about it. So in The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined, he looks at statistics on deaths by war, deaths by disease, not so much disease, but war, murder, assault, terrorism, all kinds of any kind of thing that causes violence. He looks at dueling, he looks at domestic abuse, things like that. Basically, regardless of whatever metric you look at, violence has declined over the measurable history consistently. There's a few spikes. You have World War II, you have the Civil War, things like that. But on a long-term scale, violence is lower than it has ever been. Gun violence is lower than it's ever been since the invention of guns, basically. War, we think of war as being worse than ever, and there are a lot of wars, but the actual number of people as a share of the population being killed by war is much lower than it's ever been because they're much more contained and they're fought on a much less bloody scale. So that's really interesting, and especially when you hear about the shootings, the mass shootings and everything, and you think, oh, it's worse than it's ever been. So much of it is about how much is being reported, versus how much is actually happening. And there are some concerning trends in violence that we need to look at. We shouldn't be relax our vigilance on that sort of thing, and we should try to control violence and reduce it whenever we can. But all in all, if you want to not die by violence and you could choose any year in history to live in, you'd be crazy not to choose now because your chances of being killed violently are so much greater in the past. Now, in his other book, Enlightenment Now, it's a similar theme a few years later, and he's looking at not just at violence now, but at basically every measure of human progress. He's looking at lifespans, he's looking at literacy rates, he's looking at disease, he's looking at all kinds of anything that's good for us, reason, critical thinking, the spread of information, everything that we care about, ecology even, and this concludes the same thing. The long-term trend, ever since we've been able to measure it in human history, has been towards more peace, more health, more enlightenment, more knowledge, more critical thinking, and things are just getting better and better and better, and that's awesome. And I feel like it's easy to say, oh well, that means we should just give up and not try anymore. I don't think that's what he's saying at all. It's quite the opposite, but it's an important, much needed dose of optimism against just the relentless hate and polarization and pessimism you get online these days, where people just say, oh, everything is terrible, everything is so bad, why wasn't it better like when I was a kid? And it's just, when you look at the data, it's just not true. It's a selective memory, you know? Things are better. I mean, he actually a quote from Barack Obama in there about saying, you know, if you were a time traveler and you could choose any year in history to live in, you'd be insane not to choose this year. You know, every year previously, well, not every year previously, there might be a couple of, you know, better years a couple years ago. But if you go back 10, 20, 30, 100, 200 years, things are just so much worse back then. You know, there's so many more diseases, so much more preventable medical conditions that could kill you. There's so much more violence. There's so much more war. There's so much more anger. It's just like things are better than they have ever been. And that's awesome. And I think Steven Pinker deserves great credit for bringing that to the public's attention and to try to argue the opposite case. Because there's a lot of money to be made in publishing these tell-all books that are doom and gloom and saying how terrible things are and how we're all going to die. And he went the other way with it. And I think that's so important. And he's the only one I see saying this sort of thing. So I would highly recommend that you check out Steven Pinker's lectures on YouTube, his books, his all of his writing. He's very witty, very entertaining guy, very smart, and he kind of just says what we're all thinking. He says these common sense things that we all kind of know to be true, but people are afraid to say. I would identify him broadly on the intellectual left, which I'm not on the intellectual left myself, but despite that political difference, I think that he is very admirable and very smart, and I like to listen to what he has to say. So that's my review, Enlightenment Now, and The Better Angels of Our Nature. I think you should check them out. They're great books, and all of his other works as well. His books on linguistics are really interesting. He has a book on how to write well, which is, I haven't read it, but you know, it's supposed to be good. So check them out. Have a good weekend. I've been Logan Albright. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please click that subscribe button, comment down below, and I'll see you next time.